Welcome, and thanks for tuning into the Hero Signal. Today, we're going to talk about Black Widow in a fantastic versatile build I'm calling the Rogue Operative build. Black Widow has a lot of fantastic ways to play her. You have exceptionally high damage builds where she uses Lightning Fist for unparalleled single target damage, and you have ranged stealth builds that utilize the multitude of different pistols she has to do a mix of damage. This build isn't any of those. The Rogue Operative build is a mix of infinite stealth mechanics with multiple status effects that can be done by anyone and doesn't require specific gear to work. This build is great for both the leveling game and endgame and works well solo or in groups. While there are very specific builds that might do a little more damage, this build will get you through everything without having to grind nearly at all. Being a Rogue Operative is easy to pick up and play. If you're just starting out with Black Widow, let this guide get you acclimated for one of the most versatile characters in the game. First, let's get the specialty and mastery trees out of the way. For starters, let's talk which abilities you need to unlock in the primary tree first. This build utilizes Impact Grenade quite a bit, so you definitely want that. My personal preference, save Madripoor Special until the very last ability you unlock, because personally, I feel it's more detrimental to your combos than it is helpful to the flow of combat. In the specialty tree, for the support heroic ability, again, there is a ton of versatility with Black Widow, but for this build, I've opted for Shadow Gifts, which gives a 35% chance that a defeated enemy will drop a heroic orb. Heroic orb generation is really important for this build, because the more orbs you get, the longer you can stay in stealth or use other abilities, like if you really want to stay in power surge mode all the time, that is also an option. You'll be doing a lot of takedowns while in stealth too, so you can expect double heroic orbs in many cases. For the second specialization, I opted for Mortal Cloak, which at this time does not seem to directly affect Widow's critical attack chance, but in the event that it does in the future, or even just as a team buff, it's really nice to have. For the Assault Heroic, I chose Super Static Dart, which increases the AoE of the electric field that Widow generates by 35%. The reason I chose this is because Widow is a fantastic single target damage character, but she can struggle sometimes with a lot of enemies. This ability is great to shoot into a bunch of enemies and it will do electric damage over time. Another great thing about it is that this damage over time is stackable. So for very high health enemies, once you put a positive status effect on them, such as Plasma, you can stack these negative damage over time electric attacks on them and do hundreds of thousands of damage very quickly. The best thing about Widow is that if you know you're going against a big boss, you can always change this over to Lightning Fist if you prefer. For the second specialization, I went with Lethal Bite, which gives us another Widow's Bite charge. Whether you decide you want Lightning Fist or you want to stack these super static darts, it's up to you, but either way, you get more attacks with Lethal Bite. For the ultimate heroic ability, this one is your call too. For me, I don't really enjoy fighting with Power Surge, but when I do, I find that Power Staff is far more useful than any of the other abilities. For the second specialization for the ultimate ability, I chose to go with Kilowatt, which increases the stun damage while Power Surge is active. For the Mastery tab, in the intrinsic ability tree, Overcharge Critical is very useful. We don't really need proficiency on Widow all that much, simply because she has a lot of inherent critical hit buffs. For the middle tier, Intrinsic Charge is the way to go, simply because all attacks increase the intrinsic Shadow Ops meter, so you just boost the meter fast no matter what you decide to do. In the last column, Heroic Overcharge will increase your heroic meter for as long as you stay overcharged, just another way to increase how fast your abilities regenerate. On the range tree, first tier, I chose Hazard Grenade. The hazard is pretty amazing because it will place a special effect on the ground and apply status effects over time. If you get a solid hit with a hazard, it's guaranteed to apply a status every time. For the middle column, this one is going to be a personal preference. Keep in mind that Black Widow inherently does shock damage with her heavy attacks, which is a negative status effect. That means if you want a self-battery, you'll need to apply a positive status effect, and the only option is Thermite Grenades. Don't worry too much though, as you can do PIM damage on heavy attacks or choose any number of ways to apply positive status effects if you're not interested in using the Thermite Grenade. Lastly, the third column, I went with Extended Magazines. This one is really your choice, but I find I never have enough bullets in my guns on the off chance I decide to use them. In the invisibility tree, the first column, Invisible Stun, since we want to stun our enemies fast so we can take them down and generate more heroic orbs. It also goes without saying that takedowns do tremendous damage, so it's a great way to take out multiple enemies safely. In the middle, I went with extended invisibility, which gives us an extra 2 seconds on Veil of Shadows. It's not a game changer, but the extra time is very helpful for sure. In the last column, increase critical attack chance by 20% for melee attacks while invisible. This also affects takedown damage, so this is a must. The last tree, the utility tree. Heroic Takedown Mastery in the first column is instrumental to this build. This is what will make your invisible takedown kills proc 2 heroic orbs, and it happens way more often than you think. The middle tier, I went with increased stun damage by 15%, and this is only on ranged attacks, but it's very useful if you're a full auto user and you want to stun an enemy from afar. On the last column, melee charge is what I went with for obvious reasons. We just want to get as much heroic charge as we can, and this will help little by little on every melee attack you do. Alright, we have our skill tree down. Now let's talk about stats and gear. The cool thing about Black Widow is she doesn't need to be min-maxed to the hilt to be strong. You can go middle of the road on all of her stats if you want and still be successful. My recommendation would be to focus Valor and Might and give her some decent resolve. For this build, if you can manage between 30 and 50 intensity, it will increase how fast you apply status effects and how quickly the stun meter increases on enemies. And that is a good thing. If you want to trade off some resolve for resilience, you can certainly do that, but resilience won't make too much difference unless you're able to get 30% damage reduction. So don't sacrifice everything else just to get there. As for perks, there are so many different perks for this build. Anything that grants a heroic charge burst can be helpful. You may also find gear that will increase damage from heavy combo finishers or light attacks. The build inherently takes care of itself. Any perks you choose to use is just icing on the cake. If you really want to farm for some exotic gear, the Red Room Grasps and the Red Room Cord from the Elite Heroic Hive can find a place in this build, but the legendary versions from the Elite Vaults were nerfed post-patch 1.3 and aren't worth the time. So how do you play Black Widow? It's pretty easy. Pop your stealth and go to town on some enemies. Use your Widow line to close gaps between enemies and to bounce around aerial attackers. When you see an opportunity for a takedown, do it as many times as you can. Why do I call this the Rogue Agent build? Because traditionally, rogues attack not just from stealth, but they're known for using poisons and status damage, and that is what Widow does really well with your grenade or your Widow's Bite, or even your heavy attacks. Lay down status damage of a positive or a negative status type, and then use your opposite type of status to do a ton of damage, even if your stats are less than adequate. If you prefer to run around stunning and damaging enemies in Power Surge mode, definitely do that. But don't forget that stealth will help stack damage buffs for when you do. Another important note is to watch your Shadow Ops bar. That will give you a damage increase when it's maxed out. Keep in mind that when you use your grenade while your Shadow Ops bar is full, and if you have Smoke Grenade unlocked, it will proc a stealth buff. So even if Veil of Shadows isn't ready, you can use your grenade with a maxed out Shadow Ops bar to stealth yourself. But it also consumes your Shadow Ops bar, so definitely keep that in mind. There are a lot of nuances to playing Black Widow well, but I hope this build will get you on your way to finding which path might be right for you. If you have any questions about the build, or you just want to talk about Black Widow, head into the comments. I love to hear from you guys. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in game.